While 2001 may have been the end of Sega's venture into the home console market, it was in no way the end of their prominence in the video game industry. Although they would never reach the same heights as their 90s glory days, the early 2000s would see Sega becoming one of the most successful third-party developers. And just like with their success in the 90s, they owed it all to one character. But how'd they manage it? How did Sega manage to turn their mascot from some dying 90s has-been into what he is today? Well, let's take a trip back to the early 2000s and find out. So, by the time the Dreamcast hit North America in 1999, Sega was already a shell of their former self. What was once a company that managed to break Nintendo's stranglehold on the industry was now barely managing to even make a dent in the market. Now, there are a ton of reasons for Sega's downfall. However, arguably one of the biggest factors, at least in the West, was their star player just not showing up to work that day. Way to be a team player, asshole. Back in the early 90s, Sonic is what put Sega on the map. And without a new mainline entry on the Saturn, both Sonic and Sega faded into obscurity, being replaced by new players on the scene like Lara Croft, Spyro, and Crash Bandicoot. So when a new mainline Sonic game eventually did release on the Dreamcast, it was already too late. Not even Sonic could save Sega at this point. This wasn't just any Sonic game either. This was Sonic Adventure, a game that not only finally transitioned the series into the third dimension, but a game that was seemingly crafted specifically for the next generation. You see, Sonic had only been around for about 7 years at this point. But by 1998, he was already seen as retro and archaic, the literal embodiment of a bygone era. In the words of Sonic Team's own art director, Sonic had lost that fresh new image he had when the character debuted. Almost all of that was gone, and the character felt very safe, boring, and conservative. In short, Sonic needed a reboot. So it was decided to completely redesign the entire Sonic world and cast to appeal to a more modern demographic. Not only that, but the stages were made massive and realistic to show off the power of Sega's next generation console. 6 playable characters were added to give the game an insane amount of replay value. You could go online and download additional content for the game, which was something that was basically unheard of at the time. This wasn't your parents' Sonic the Hedgehog. This was Sonic completely reinvented for the next generation. And it sold pretty well. Really well, in fact. For a short while, it seemed like Sega might actually be able to pull this off. But it just wasn't enough. The PlayStation 2's launch was just over the horizon, and by 2001, there was seemingly no way Sega would be able to keep up with the competition. So on January 31st, 2001, Sega made the announcement that they were leaving the console race for good. So after dipping out of the home console market and going third party, Sega tested the waters by porting a few of their recent arcade hits to the PS2 and GameCube. These immediately became massive successes, both critically and commercially, which helped give Sega a glimpse at the potential of going third party like this. Things finally weren't looking so grim. So, hot off this newfound success, Sega had Sonic Team port their last Dreamcast game, Sonic Adventure 2, to the GameCube. Now, saying this port was a success is a bit of an understatement, as it would go on to become the best-selling third-party title of all time on the GameCube. And due to the success, a whole new generation of Sonic fans were born. This game was fast, edgy, had this extreme butt rock soundtrack. Eggman says fuck, I think. For many new and longtime Nintendo fans, this was truly unlike anything they had played before, and they were hooked. Now, while Sonic was still fighting an uphill battle in terms of critical reception, there was no denying the sales numbers. Sonic was back. Finally, after years of f***ing around, SEGA had done it. They finally found a way to, well, stay relevant in an industry that was quickly evolving. No longer were they restricted by their own hardware or forced to compete with massive media empires. This was a completely new and exciting path forward for SEGA, and leading them down that path was once again Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, of course, SEGA didn't want to let this momentum go to waste. Sonic Adventure 2 Battle's success had just granted them an opportunity to potentially reclaim their spot atop the industry. There was now this massive group of brand new Sonic fans out there, and they couldn't risk losing them. SEGA knew they had to strike while the iron was hot, so they quickly got to work pouring out as much Sonic content as possible for Nintendo's platforms. However, Sonic Team only had a finite amount of resources at their disposal, and while they were pretty confident when it came to working with the GameCube, their team had little to no experience working with Nintendo's main handheld at the time, the Game Boy Advance. And this was a huge problem. The Game Boy Advance was absolutely killing it. It was basically the only handheld gaming platform back then. And due to this, it had more than double the install base compared to the GameCube. So, as you could imagine, creating games for this thing could prove to be extremely lucrative. SEGA would be silly to just ignore this portion of the market. So, while Sonic Team continued work on the GameCube, they enlisted the help of another studio called Dimps to create a brand new Sonic game for the GBA called Sonic Advance. Released the same day as Adventure 2 Battle in Japan, this was Sonic Team's attempt at blending together elements from Sonic's 2D roots with the look and feel of the modern 3D titles. And they absolutely nailed it! Building up speed and momentum to blast through loops felt just like it did on the Genesis, and the aspects borrowed from the more modern titles like rail grinding provided for some really interesting level layouts. There's even 4 playable characters here, each with their own special abilities. My favorite definitely has to be Amy though. She doesn't curl into a ball when jumping, which means she can't jump into enemies. Instead, you have to deal with enemies using her hammer and take advantage of her high jump to get through stages. It forces you to approach Sonic's gameplay and level design in a completely unique way, and I'm into it. Now, while Sonic Advance was criticized for its short length and lack of polish in some areas, it would still go on to become one of the best-selling Game Boy Advance titles of all time, with over 1 million copies sold just in the US alone. And as a result of this success, multiple sequels would be greenlit. The Sonic train just kept on a-rolling. So while Dimps was off working on Sonic Advance and its sequels, what was Sonic Team up to? Well, besides working on a few non-Sonic related projects, they had to figure out a way to keep all of these new Sonic fans interested in the series. However, the next new mainline entry was still at least 2 years out, and with how quickly the industry was moving during this era, there was no way they could afford to wait that long. Sega knew that more than anyone. So in the meantime, they decided to show all of these new fans what made Sonic famous in the first place. So a year after Adventure 2 Battle, we got Sonic Mega Collection. This was such a smart move. Hook 'em with Adventure 2 Battle and reel 'em in with Mega Collection. It was the perfect way to get all of these new Sonic fans up to speed with the series. And there is just so much stuff here. Anyone that was even remotely interested in Sonic after playing Adventure 2 Battle would pick up this collection and come out of it a goddamn Sonic expert by the end. Then, less than a year later, in 2003, Sonic Team would finally get around to porting the first Sonic Adventure to the GameCube in the form of Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut. What the fuck is that title? But by this point, Sega was absolutely killing it. I mean, in just 2 short years, they managed to transform their mascot from some 90s has-been into a top-selling third-party franchise. Sonic seemed absolutely unstoppable by 2003. However, sticking with Nintendo like this would only get them so far. You see, the GameCube's sluggish sales meant they only had a fraction of the market to work with. Sega wanted to go bigger. They wanted to turn Sonic into the industry icon he once was. So they came up with a plan, which prompted the then head of Sonic Team, Yuji Naka, to declare 2003 to be Sonic Year. A year dedicated to exposing as many people as possible to the Sonic franchise. The first step in this year-long plan? Get Sonic back on Saturday mornings.
Only in Toon Disney will you find the amazing quick-change artist, Sonic the Hedgehog, Toon Disney's fastest Toon hero.
I even hold the speed record for running backwards.
You see, Sonic's success in the early 90s wasn't just limited to his games. He was a worldwide phenomenon, thanks in big part to his ventures outside of gaming. Comics, toys, parade floats, and of course, his many Saturday morning cartoons. TV was such an effective marketing strategy in the 90s, and still was during the turn of the millennium. Sega recognized this, and together with TMS Entertainment, got to work on a brand new Sonic animated series, which would eventually become Sonic X. Production started around 2001, with a short trailer being made that mostly acted as a pitch for the series, and was originally never meant to be shared publicly. However, it would eventually be included as an extra in a DVD release for the final series. The trailer included Sonic and friends just doing, well, Sonic stuff. No original characters, no gimmicks, none of this shit, none of that shit, no humans. No humans. Sure hope things stay this way. Yeah, you know things didn't stay this way. So, at the 2003 World Hobby Fair in Japan, we got another trailer. But now the show was about Sonic being transported to our world, where they meet Chris from Kingdom Hearts, and that's basically it. The show was notable for not only having original plot lines, but also, in later seasons, adapting some of the stories from certain games, like both Sonic Adventures and even Sonic Battle, which was set to release later that same year. Now, unlike Sonic's earlier cartoons, Sonic X was made with a Japanese audience in mind, which is ironic since the show apparently didn't do too hot in Japan. However, when it was brought over to the West by 4Kids a few months later, it became a massive success, with it being #1 in its time slot on multiple occasions. In fact, it was so much more successful in the West that they originally didn't even bother airing the 3rd season in Japan. It wasn't until 15 years later in 2020 that they finally aired it as a tie-in for the Sonic movie.
Yeah, they just didn't give a shit over there.
But even though Sonic X didn't do much to boost the series' popularity in Japan, it did wonders for it in the West by introducing Sonic to an entirely new audience that might have not even touched a video game before then. But of course, what's a Saturday morning cartoon without merchandise? Toys, plushies, comics, t-shirts, this show had it all. And this merchandise was kind of phase 2 of the whole Sonic Year plan. But while Sonic X and its merchandise helped immensely in marketing the franchise to a wider audience, phase 3 of Sonic Year included the holy grail of marketing. Fucking childhood obesity, baby! Yeah, they did a Happy Meal tie-in. And you probably remember it too, since it was extremely successful. They were just these cheap little LCD games made by Fisher-Price, but just the novelty of getting a free video game with your fucking chicken nuggets was just so cool back then. This tie-in proved to be so successful that a second set was released in 2004. This one even included this Willy Wonka-esque contest, where if you managed to get a silver version of one of the games, you could win various Sonic-related prizes. Like, I don't know, like a game you probably already owned. But I'm getting a bit too ahead of myself, since this set was actually a tie-in for the final phase of Sonic Year. To cap off the year, Sonic Team would be releasing the first ever multi-platform Sonic game, Sonic Heroes. So Sonic Team had one goal with this game: make this the most accessible Sonic game ever. You see, having the audience of all 3 platforms available to them was a huge opportunity to completely skyrocket the franchise's popularity. And because of this, they couldn't just make another game that only appealed to Sonic fans. No, they had to make a game that could appeal to anyone. I mean, they were no longer just working with Sega diehards or a small group of Nintendo fans. They were now working with the entire gaming market. Sonic Team wanted to make sure they cast the widest possible net, so any potential barriers to entry had to go. It couldn't be a numbered sequel and had to be as disconnected as possible from the previous Sonic Adventure titles. After all, in 2003, there was no way for PS2 or Xbox owners to play any of the previous Sonic titles. So it was decided to make Sonic Heroes its own thing. Perfect for any potential newcomer to just jump straight in. But Sonic Team wasn't just focused on newcomers. There was stuff here for longtime fans as well. Like controlling the original trio, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles at the same time sounded like such an amazing concept. It felt like the perfect evolution to the Sonic Adventure formula. Not only that, but the classic aesthetic was back. The roster was literally doubled, and they were even bringing back deep cuts from Sonic's past with characters like the Chaotix and Metal Sonic. Everything was pointing to this game being the best 3D Sonic game ever. The perfect way to end Sonic Year. So on December 30th, 2003 in Japan and early 2004 everywhere else in the world, Sonic Heroes hit store shelves. The game that this whole Sonic Year celebration had been building up to was finally here. And well, reviews were pretty mixed. You see, behind the scenes, Sonic Heroes went through an incredibly stressful and rushed development cycle. Sega's management forced Sonic Team to have the game ready in just a year and a half. This caused the incredibly small development team to be pushed to their absolute limit. People worked around the clock, barely having time to even sleep in order to meet strict deadlines. For most of the game's development, there was only one person doing level design after another staff member fell ill. The game's director even lost 22 pounds over the course of Sonic Heroes development due to just how relentless the working conditions were. And this rushed development cycle, well, it unfortunately shows. Sonic Heroes is plagued with bugs, tedious level design, and an inherent lack of polish throughout. Now, it isn't all bad, there's quite a bit to enjoy here, but there's just too many rough edges holding it back in my opinion. Sonic Team's lack of experience developing for multiple platforms was also made pretty apparent, with the PS2 version in particular being an absolute mess in terms of frame rate and overall polish. But you know what? None of this even mattered, because Sonic Heroes sold a ton. Yeah, while the critical reception wasn't the best, commercially, Sonic Heroes sold amazingly. Over on Twitter, I asked what everyone's first Sonic game was, and after going through almost 3,000 responses, a majority of you said you started here with Sonic Heroes. Sega had done it. Their star player was finally, at least somewhat, back in the spotlight. Sonic Heroes' commercial success showed Sega how much potential there was in having Sonic be a multi-platform franchise. That, in addition to the very successful marketing push that was Sonic Year, put Sonic in a very promising position by the end of 2003. Too bad Puberty and Inks had to go and fuck all that up.